Oh, so who joined? Hey, Bob.
Hey, Tammy, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi. Tammy, I thought since I've been to Power Summit that this meeting might be a little overkill, but I'm here anyway.
Glad to have you. You are probably correct, but glad to have you. Yeah,
Sorry I missed it,
competition
Tammy.
never hurts, right? What'd you say, Bob?
Sorry I missed it, but the summit,
Yep. I think you would have had a good 3 days.
yeah. The good news is I've got some projects that I'm doing that so that's good. Anyway.
Yeah, we can't best on you for your working with clients.
Yeah, things are opening up, thankfully.
Good. I have 3 o'clock. We'll give it a minute or so. All right, I've got 3:02, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We can catch anybody up that perhaps pops on in the next couple of minutes. So one of our commitments that we shared at the end of 2020 was that we were going to redo in 2021 the team leadership process and the management process. We unveiled the new leadership process last October. That gave us a really good base. And as we move forward with the project and started thinking about it, we realized that there really, in team leadership and management, a total of 5 unique chapters. Everything else is really pulled from the original leadership. The 2 unique chapters in management is organizational goals and project management. And the 3 unique chapters in team leadership was building a successful team, creating and managing performance and employee evaluations, and discipline. So as we took a more closer look at it, we realized that with as excited as we are with the new leadership process, we could move that forward and use it as a base for team leadership and management and just put our efforts and our focus on revising those 5 unique chapters because they are important. We still wanted to be able to give you guys the ability to kind of put together something that services a particular level of the organization. Team leadership's original goal was to replace our supervisory process, which is really focused on, a new leader, a new manager, a new supervisor, whatever the title is, but someone who is basically going from super worker to supervisor. You're doing a really great job. Now we're going to move you into a leadership or management position. So having things in there about building successful teams, having employee evaluation and discipline, all things a new leader should know how to do. It's somewhat tactical, if you will. And management has always been for that kind of mid-management level. Someone who's been managing for a while needs a refresher on being a better and a more successful manager. And then, as you are aware, is that our executive leadership tool really focused on the C-suite. So what we did between February and June last week is we worked on those 5 chapters. So instead of having a team leadership or a management process, what I'm going to show you and walk you through, the new title is, the working title is Leading in Organizations. So it doesn't matter what your title is, it doesn't matter what your role is, if it's new or if you've been managing or leading for a while, we're going to call it Leading in Organizations. So we shared this last week when we soft unveiled this. What you see in the big bold is the titles from leadership, the new leadership we unveiled in October. So what I'm going to walk you through is literally where the new chapters are getting inserted. So if you see, for example, your leadership journey, that's the first chapter of the new leadership process. That's already done and existing. So we just use them as placeholders. So we narrowed down those 5 chapters to 3, and I'll walk you through it. So the suggested flow, and this is a working flow, because if you haven't seen the email today, or if you weren't with us Power Summit, you've been given a link to electronically make comments and edits and suggestions. So this is a working flow. This is by no means set in stone, but this is our suggestion to give you something to think about. So leadership journey, leadership success, the power of emotional intelligence, understanding diversity while creating inclusion, achieving goals for success, organizational goal setting, and project management is one of the new 3 chapters. So the first 5 that you see on this screen are the first 5 of the leadership process. And then we've inserted organizational goal setting and project management. If you're familiar with those chapters in the previous material, the objective was to link the goal setting model to a organizational, I'm now managing some level of a team. So how do I take this goal setting process and utilize the power of that tool when I'm working with my teams? So organizational goals, what are they? Linking it back to the goal setting model. The power of organizational goals. Criteria for setting organizational goals. Organizational goals and project management. So what we did is we merged the 2. These were 2 chapters specifically in the management process. So we wanted to do 2 things. We wanted to link project management to organizational goals, because if you really think about it, project management is in fact a form of organizational goal setting. The project management chapter in the management process previously was extremely technical, and many affiliates didn't like it for that reason. Our objective is always to, in our materials and tools, is to provide a framework and allow you, the facilitator, to get into the details that's necessary for your client. Project management in the management chapter or the management process kind of strayed away from that conceptual, here's a framework, here's a foundation. Now think about it as it relates to your company, your team, whatever the case may be. So we simplified it. We still talk about project management and we use some of the language. What's the difference between project management and functional production management? We link it to the fact that if you're running a small company or a small team, the goal planning sheet could be very successfully used as a project management guideline. We list the goal, we list the obstacles, we brainstorm the action steps, we select the solution we think we're going to work on, we put a timetable to it, and voila, we're managing a project. But then we get into a little deeper as it relates to some of the things that can get in the way, the student syndrome, the whole concept of many students wait till the very last minute to write the paper or to study for the test, Parkinson's law, work expands to the time allotted, and Murphy's law, you think you know what's going to happen and it's never what you think it is. So the more specific or more project management oriented concept is, instead of allowing each individual to kind of say, this is what my part of the project is going to take X, and the next individual saying, my part of the project is going to take Y, and so on, and then add it up all together, back it out to your end date. What we're suggesting in the concept of there's another approach is, as team leader, you manage the timeline. And we give some equations to create, a project buffer and a feeder buffer. So project buffer is all the extra time each team member puts in to buffer their ability to get the project done. And instead of allowing the individual to manage that, we're saying, as team leader, you pull it out by using some of the math we put into the chapter, and you put it at the end of the project buffer. So if Lauren comes in early, I get to add time to my project buffer. But if I come in late, we can protect the end date, right? And then the feeder buffer. The feeder buffer is doing the same thing, but looking outside. People that are feeding your particular process. It could be raw materials. It could be, anything. I'm getting services from my accountant. I can't do payroll next Friday unless I get the details from my accountant. So if they don't get here, and real example, during the pandemic, they were mailing payroll to my house because I'm the numbers girl. Well, with the mail being goofy, there were many times, I think there were 3 or 4 times, we didn't get checks. So I had to be creative and figure out, how are we going to get people paid in the appropriate time frame. So that's how you look at a feeder buffer. And we've created 2 visuals because obviously project management is not just about manufacturing or something related to manufacturing. You can use the same concept with service-oriented approaches. So we have an accounting example and we have a manufacturing example. So people can see that project management is not just about engineering. It's not just about manufacturing. It truly is applicable to any type of organization. Again, reiterating that simple projects can be managed really well with a goal planning sheet. And again, it refers to the fact that there's all kinds of software and tools out there in the marketplace. Again, we're not suggesting what tools they use. We're just helping them come up with, how is this relevant to your organization? Are we good at it? Do we need to get better? And if we need to get better, what do we need to improve, and why, and by when? So that's where we're suggesting that chapter gets inserted in this flow. Then we go back to some of the new leadership chapters. As we continue through our flow, we have understanding and affirming you, the communications chapter, managing your time, making decisions and solving issues. Again, if you were with us in October or you purchased the new leadership material, these chapters are exactly the same, which is why we didn't put the content in, because we didn't really want to make everybody's brain explode. But after making decisions and solving issues, we've inserted building successful teams. This chapter is pretty much conceptually the same, just really what we did here is refreshed it. Just brought it into more current vocabulary. But the whole concept of this chapter is, as a new leader, a new manager, a new team leader, what do I need to do to focus on building successful teams? We've got 2 new examples in here to talk about, different types of teams outside the business world. We use the Beatles as an example, and we use the Rolling Stones. just kind of bring something fun to the table. The fact that were so successful in their early years. I mean, both of the bands had issues, but in their early years and how they as a team excelled. There's a whole section on developing trust. Trust is essential to the success of any team. We talk about that concept. The trust cycle, which comes from the book Building Productive Teams. How to analyze trust within your team. Do you got it? Do you need to make it better? Is it where you want to be? Again, giving some of your participants some real practical, let's assess where we are on a scale of however we're measuring it, and generating action steps as it relates to where they want to go. There's a section on you and your boss, and we use boss because everybody's got one. Whether you report to a board of directors, if you report to the CEO, the CFO, and you have a manager, everybody, and we use that generic term on purpose because everybody's got one that's gainfully employed for most cases, and they can be called 70 different things, but everybody refers to it as your boss. So just really understanding that relationship. Everybody wants to be treated the way they wish to be treated. So, mutually clarifying goals, communicating it early and often. Observe and understand your boss's style. And you'll see in the parentheses, depending upon how much you're following along, we put an assessment commercial in there. So if you had not had the opportunity to do assessments with your client at this point, here's a nice little commercial that says, if you really want to understand your boss, there's some really cool tools out there, which you all have in your back pocket, which can help you understand your boss and vice versa. Understanding your boss's goals and mindsets. How can you help them accomplish their professional goals unless you know what they are? They should know what yours are, and you should know what theirs are. Realizing that your boss is human. Just because he or she holds a particular title and has the authority and the power to manage you, they're still a human being. They have good days, they have bad days. And as a coworker with that individual, you're going to feel both. So how are you to handle that? Being enthusiastic about your job, being responsible. No one should be taking on too much. And although, most people get along really well, there are going to be days and there are going to be times where there's conflict and disagreement. And you don't always have to agree to agree. You can agree to disagree as long as everyone understands where we're going. Then we move into the section creating and managing performance. Again, this is for that newly promoted leader, manager, supervisor that they were the super worker, so they were not creating or managing performance. Do they know how to do that? And again, we've always joked for many, many decades, that whole concept of super worker on Friday, supervisor on Monday, and absolutely nothing changed. And this is what we're trying to help make sure it changes that. So once you understand how to create and manage performance, then we talk about setting the stage for performance. Okay, how do I implement these concepts now? It talks in this chapter about onboarding appropriately, understanding what the mutual goals are. We talk about setting the stage. There's also a section here, techniques for better training and development. Are you in charge of creating the training and the development? Or is HR? Maybe you're part of a larger organization, all that goes through HR. Does HR know what you want to have accomplished? If I send somebody away to HR to get trained, this is what I want them to come back and have. This is what I want them to be able to come back and do, and to have some very communicated specific goals. And then, okay, we've got all of this great groundwork laid out. How do we sustain results? Once you've got somebody trained, it's not ever finished. And you're managing and creating performance is never finished. There's never a checkbox that you can say, done. It's a daily, weekly, quarterly, yearly experience if you're doing it well. If you're engaging with your team members and you're doing it well. Being able to communicate what's expected and what the measurements are. And then creating a continuous feedback process. So I've communicated that our organization's error rate should remain below X%. How do I continuously feed back to my team whether they are on target, behind, or what do I need to reinforce? Then we talk about the principles of reinforcement, and we talk about positive reinforcement, we talk about negative reinforcement, and we talk about discipline. Obviously, the chapter is going to be talking about positive reinforcement is what's going to get the most long lasting results. But there are times that negative reinforcement has a place. You know, most of us drive cars old enough now that they've trained our brains. If you don't if you don't buckle up, your music goes away, or some other annoying types of habits. We talk about discipline and removal because, again, nobody really wants to play a lot of time in discipline and removal, but sometimes it's just necessary, and creating that process. And again, this is aimed towards someone who is maybe new to a management role, or it needs to be reinforced because the organization is trying to shift culture. So original intent is kind of for that newly promoted team leader, but this is also really very appropriate if an organization is trying to shift culture. You know, if we had this kind of a culture and we really want to go over here, what do our team leaders need to do, understand, and what do they need to learn in order to behave differently? And behavior drives culture. And then we have evaluations and discipline. So this takes the chapter we just walked through and now gets really kind of nitty gritty. You know, I've never done this before. I've never created evaluations. I've never really had to have a disciplinary interview. So this one gets a little bit more tactical than the other two we looked at. So we start with conducting evaluation. You know, what is this supposed to look like? How often is this supposed to happen? There was a big debate. Lauren was there to share last week as far as the word evaluation. And we spent a bunch of time having a conversation on evaluation. And we're not going to make a final call till we get the feedback and edits. But basically, out of the conversation last week, I think, and if you guys have any really strong opinions on it, where's my note? I think where we're leaning is we will kind of find and replace evaluation with mutual review. That seemed to be the culmination of our discussion last week. Because a lot of folks in our conversation last week, so the 30-some folks that we had last week at Power Summit, most agreed, and Lauren can chime in because she was there, most agreed that evaluation has a negative connotation. We also had a discussion about, you know, evaluation also sometimes means it's linked to promotion dollars. So we're trying to get those unlinked because that's really not the way it should be. So I think we're leaning towards, based upon the feedback from last week, mutual review, which will have some additional creation that's going to have to go into this, because the way it's written now, it talks about mutual conversations, but it doesn't go in as in depth as I think what came out of our conversation last week. So we're probably going to need a couple of paragraphs on what that process of doing a mutual review is going to look like. So that will be an add.
Hey, Tammy.
Yeah.
So I just did this chapter with a company last week, and I asked them, so what do you guys call it? Because one of the documents they gave me said performance review. But anyway, so I said, what do you call it? And they said review.
Okay. Oh, that's.
So I think you're right on. I think review to me is far better than evaluation.
Great.
And then the other thing, I don't know where it would work in here, but in those first level meetings, and I think it fits the new terminology, they call them like coaching reports or coaching session, and that kind of fits our lingo anyway, but it's way more positive than, you know, performance discussion or preliminary discipline or verbal, or, you know what I mean? Coaching and then review. But anyway, that's my 2 cents worth.
Oh, I really appreciate that. And it's great to have, you know, real live customer feedback from last week. Well, I don't know how many people noticed it, but my original intent in preparing this for the soft unveil is the old chapter used performance review. It was there were three different descriptors to cover,
Yeah,
in essence, what every organization might call it. And I particularly went just to evaluation because out of all three words that were used, evaluation sounded the most neutral. So that's where I went. But I really like your confirmation and our discussion last week of doing a mutual review.
yeah. Mhm.
And then there's a conversation about measuring standards, how it's so important to not be vague, to be very specific.
Yeah.
That when you're talking with your team members one-on-one or as a team, are they ahead of the game and we're cheering on to victory, or they need to come back from behind to get the win? And we use the football analogy because I think everybody kind of gets it. But a good conversation upon how you're measuring those standards and how you're communicating that information to your team. So, development stage, making improvements. So when you're having those mutual reviews, what does it look like when we're talking about these are the areas that we're going to work on to review? And we use the goal summary sheet here. There's a picture off to the left, so that this is a great worksheet where, okay, we've now had the conversation. You're doing great in these three areas. We mutually agree that these two areas you're going to work on till we meet again in 60 days or whatever the time frame is. So the team leader, the team person has each a copy of that, and it becomes a really working document for them to communicate back and forth. Again, we're focusing on most of life with your team is happy life, but there's some times where you have to have that discipline conversation. And again, we use discipline in the real definition. This is kind of like in intermetrics on the cube where the word manipulate used to trip everybody up because that has a negative connotation. By true definition, it does not. Discipline has a negative connotation because we think it's bad. The true definition of discipline is built upon the same root as disciple, which is one who accepts and follows a teacher. Discipline is really about improvement, not necessarily what we all conjure up to be a negative thing. So we get and talk about that. And we left that in there specifically because managers, new and mature, they don't like the discipline conversation, but it is in fact part of their role. And I think that having the team look at it as discipline is meant to be an area of improvement. We talk about creating the environment for those discipline conversations, how to prepare for those discipline conversations. And we have a section on the disciplinary interview, what it should look like, what it should feel like. And then we end with the last chapter, which is motivation and courage. And if you remember motivation and courage in the new leadership process, it's really a chapter that's focused on motivation, yes. And it's also focused on the whole concept that this is an ever evolving process. And for you to continue to be motivated to improve, and for you to have the courage to continue to be motivated to improve, and that there will be stumbling blocks, but that you as a good leader can have the courage to get over them and motivation. So it's kind of it's got a lot of meat to it, but it's also meant to have a little bit of a rah-rah. Just because you're done with this process doesn't mean that you're done. And that's the attitude we want them to walk away with. So for our off-the-shelf folks, we have two types of customers. We have the off-the-shelf folks. Tom Leonard, he uses probably over 100 strategic planning processes a year, and he is an off-the-shelf guy. He makes literally no changes, and he loves it. And then we've got folks like Doug Brown. I'm sure you'll be shocked and amazed that every process that he orders for his client is customized. He literally goes down the matrix and says, based upon my fact finding, I'm going to use these 11 chapters. And Wendy, this is the order that I want them in. Everything is customized. So because of the way Trusted Advisors has moved to a more electronically produced, more just-in-time produced material, team leadership and management are really not going away. When we unveiled the new strategic planning process, I think that was in 2019. Tom Leonard was part of that task force for obvious reasons. And he said, you know what? If I can use the existing one, that's what I'm going to do. So he never moved to the new one because he loves the existing one. So for affiliates, team leadership and management will really never go away. So, if Bob says, I love the old team leadership process and he wants 20 of them tomorrow, he too can have them. Like Leadership Unveil last year, we call and refer to it internally as Leadership 2.0 because we still have affiliates that are using the existing leadership. This particular combined model, the working title, as I said, is Leading in Organizations. We like that because it really does cover any type of leader at any level within the organization. Just because we have an executive leadership process, depending upon the maturity of the executive leadership team, this process would work exceptionally well. So with that, I will stop talking and see what questions, thoughts you all have.
So Tammy, a thought on the discussion about what do you call it, a review or evaluation or whatever. I always liked, and this is not current, this is at least 4 years old, to think about what's the purpose. And the purpose is improvement and motivation.
Right.
And so I typically would use those kind of words. And I'm, as you know, a high S and very patient. And so I was happy having a couple of meetings to do that process as opposed to just one. A lot of people won't stand it. But if you have somebody who is dedicated on improving themselves, you can have a pre-meeting, let them know what's coming, let them know what it is, and ask them what they would like to talk about and focus on. And then you can bury that right into the review. So I don't know if you have a chance to put that in there, but it's sometimes good not to slap them in the face with it, so to speak. The other thing is that you had the word removal in there, and I think that referred to removing a benefit, like removing some pay or removing, a lunch, extended lunch or something like that.
Mhm.
There's also the issue of removing the person. And every now and then, we all have those problems that there really is no other solution.
Right.
You try, and you try, and you try again. And in spite of the sincere conversations, it just ain't happening. And at some point in time, you just gotta, stop the drain on the team and stop the drain on a person, stop the drain on yourself. So I don't know if you have that in there or not, but there is a time for firing.
There's a little bit in there, but I've made a note. I'll go back and see if it needs to be enhanced.
And don't worry too much about the words because the HR profession as a whole has tried every word there is, and they all end up with bad connotations. And so there's not much you can do about picking a nice word for those meetings. But there is a trend to not have them at all, to just make it a continuous process. But the danger with that is that people, the low eyes won't do it, and then they surprise the employees, and then that's not good either.
Yeah, big part of our conversation last
Yeah.
week is there's a lot of semantics around the words.
Yeah.
We're never going to pick exactly right, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of organizations that just don't have a process or they don't do
Yeah. So two other thoughts. One is quick. When I use the word managing, I try to restrict that to tasks and things. And the word leadership, that's about people, right? And so I don't manage people, I lead them. But I manage the work, I manage the flow, I manage the machine, I manage the phone, whatever it is, right? And then the other thing that comes to mind about this is that very often these processes look like they were written by a high D. And super disciplined, maybe a high D and C combined. And not everybody works that way, right? And so if somehow we could insert, something about your behavior characteristics and your motivators, I wouldn't go to attributes or acumen, but that would be really valuable.
And how would you see that?
Well, there's two styles in every management leadership relationship. There's two styles, right? There's the person being managed and there's the person leading, right? And so you kind of have to be aware of that. And, of course, if you're doing a development course, you can bring that out. But somehow it would be nice if the material, if it wasn't left up to the trusted advisors facilitator, that the material would bring up that, there is a personal style. And just like the emotional intelligence quadrant says, once you know yourself and you know others, then you can start managing yourself and the relationships. And that's key to leading effectively.
Thank you. Good thought.
I'll try to put that in the notes, Tammy, but I'm not good at using those note things.
No, as I'm listening to you, I'm taking notes, so I think I'm good. I don't have to take the extra step, Mike.
Yeah, well, I want to read it. And so if I see something that jumps out, I'll just jot it down. But
Other thoughts?
oh, will this come with like a implementation guide updated?
Yes.
Okay.
Our objective is to allow our participants from last week at Power Summit and for everybody, because you all got an email today. So if you weren't at Power Summit, you don't miss the opportunity to share thoughts, share suggested edit ideas like we were talking on. That's going to be open until June 30th. And then we're going to use the month of July to, look at the edits, make the changes, make the updates. So the new process will be affiliate ready in August. We haven't set a date yet because that's going to be dependent upon how much feedback we get. And so far, I typically don't go in very often until the end, but we've gotten a lot so far. So I'm not sure when it'll be out in, because what we'll do is we'll make the final edits, and then the last step of the process, it needs to go to audio so that we can provide a complete process.
Does the pre-buy have is there like a scarcity with that?
I'm not sure I follow.
Well, you know what the principle of scarcity in selling is. Hey, this is open to you only for 6 days. And if you don't do it in 6 days, it goes away.
Wasn't there a timeline in the email?
I saw the pre-buy button. Maybe I didn't read it carefully enough.
Yeah, when I do presentations like this, I'm on a totally different computer. So
Oh, okay.
I have to look that up and email it to you, but I'm pretty sure when we talked.
Yeah. It says, please order by 6:25. Okay. That was at the very end. And so I didn't see that. Okay. Thanks.
No problem. Other thoughts, questions? Yeah, if you haven't gone through it or attached to that link, I would encourage you to do so, and so that you can read it at your leisure and take away points that are important to you or share feedback.
So this has nothing to do with this per se, but one of the things I'm discovering more and more is that incorporating the personal development, the 6 pieces of the pie, is really hard because it's too much time. Most people don't have time to sneeze, and then, and there's a lot of work associated with that and a lot of thought. And I remember somebody, I can't think of who it was, but anyway, they some affiliates got together and they marched themselves through one of the processes. And then the question came up, well, what did you do about personal development? And the answer was, well, we did it. We didn't really. It was just too hard. It took too much time. We did some of it at the end, but not all of it, I think was the answer, if I remember right. So that's something that would be interesting to try to streamline or address, because it's consistent for me that personal development just is too much. And I think it's because people don't, they got work, they got family, they got social, they got other activities. And now, they just, or maybe it's not, maybe I don't motivate them enough. I don't know.
Are you doing a life wheel a session?
Well, basically in one of them that I'm implementing, the time strategies, I'm doing it every other session, right? So, it's like I'm doing content one session and life wheel the next session with, kind of a catch up on each in between. And on that one, I ended up saying, hey, look, just pick 2. Just go through this thing, look at them all, look at all the questions and pick 2. And we'll focus on those 2.
Okay.
And, people end up doing that anyway, right? Because they say, when they do the evaluation, yeah, I'm good here, I'm good here, I'm good here. Oh, I got to do this, this, and this, or this and this. And anyway, just a suppose, a whine.
No, I hear you. I'll make a note of that. Maybe we need to do something. Other thoughts, suggestions?
Thanks, Tammy. This reinforces what we learned the other day at Power Summit.
Pretty much. Well, I'm glad the 5 of you were here, but unless you've got some discussion or other points, I certainly don't want to take up the next 22 minutes of your life, because I'm sure you, to Mike's point, you've cut other stuff that's important.
That wasn't my message, Tom.
No, but I mean, your message, I mean, it's true. Well, I appreciate your participation. It is being videoed. If anybody wants to go back, I'm sure Jenna will have it uploaded tomorrow. And as you're working through it, if you want to discuss something or that you have an idea that would just be quicker to talk through, just call me.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies
Thanks.
and gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tammy.
You're welcome.